With me, I'm very privileged to have Katrina Nødtved, who is Commissioner for Culture for Bergen, and Stein Bjelland, who is a long-time colleague of mine because we first worked together when Stavanger was European Capital of Culture. Stein is chair of Music Norway. Katrina is, as you know, the extremely effective Commissioner for Culture in Bergen. Katrina, would you like to start by just saying a little bit about your work and your role here, and then we will move on to Stein.
Sure.
And then I will set the two of you against each other and try not to interrupt. Please.
Thank you, Mary. And really nice to be here. And thanks to Anna for hosting this amazing festival. So my job is to be the political leader for the city of Bergen within the arts and culture field. And I'm quite new as a politician, so I don't really know what that is supposed to mean. I only got a few months of normality before COVID hit us. So lately my job has been to pick up on all the problems that the virus creates for the cultural sector and listen and be close up, because in a crisis things happen so fast, so you need to be close if you're gonna have any chance of helping. And we've tried to help and support the art sector through the crisis from the municipality itself, but also by communicating the needs of the city to national governments with varying success, we should say. But fortunately, I think we're there now that we still have a vibrant cultural sector in Bergen and in Norway, and we're pretty lucky to have that. So in this process, I've of course gained a lot of insight into what's important for the different parts of the field, and I think that's going to be something I bring with me moving forward, and which also plays into this discussion, because something that we've learned, I think both me and the bureaucrats that have been in the cultural sector for a long time, is the importance and also the I would say unique role of the commercial cultural sector and how they fit into the kind of ecosystem.
Stein, you sort of you just led wonderfully into what Stein does. Stein, just talk a bit about what you do.
I do many things.
You do indeed, yes.
Grown-up me.
Oh, let's talk about grown-up you first.
Yeah,
like, okay.
I'm doing these, on board. I'm the chair of the Kunsthall Stavanger board. I'm now the elected chair of Music Norway. I used to be the elected chair of Fond Flydebilde, the audiovisual fund, for 6 years. And on the Stavanger Symphony Orchestra and a lot of companies and stuff, meaning I'm also been touching sort of culture policies and sort of trying to be a grown-up and actually see what's going on in that space and dealing with the Kulturdepartementet and the ministers and all that stuff, and trying to use a language they understand, placing culture where it actually belongs, which is like the foundation of a modern society, and also trying to train artists and culture workers that we need to actually be able to express and say something meaningful about the role of culture, but also the value of culture. And I'm also teaching, so I'm teaching at New York University, a class on streaming. So the whole I lived through the old music economy into the no music economy to the new music economy, basically felt that on this body for years. And then I'm also interested in sort of tech startup, music tech. We're starting a music investment fund because sort of bringing the indie me into investing, using money and capital as a tool and a vehicle to do good and actually help, something I really believe in, the indie sector, so the independent part of the ecosystem. And I'm married to a visual artist. I spend roughly 6 months a year in New York. So I have one foot in the sort of super commercial, very different than Norway, cultural financing world. And then, being here, growing up and actually trying to understand that we actually have the best and most beautiful financing system for arts in the whole wide world, and how that actually works, because it does something to the arts itself. I'm trying to get the Kulturaktivistisk to do research on this, because is Norwegian arts different than elsewhere? Because we have soft funding, and and coming back to this, I mean, is art in Norway political at all? I'm turning 14 again. The older I get, the more like, I need to change and do something. And to me, I mean, art is actually, maybe this is me. I do a million different things. I work in the intersection of money and arts, and I teach that. I work in different projects and sort of devoted my life to that. Sounds nice. But it's like, you know, we're kind of moved, I'm saying to my students, I've told you guys, we're kind of moving from rationality into emotionality. And our core product is emotions. So there's no industry wherever that are actually more capable to be that sort of driving force for change than actually the arts. And I think as coming from the sector itself, you hear my language here. You know, I'm using a language that you understand. It's like it's my role to actually help you to do good and sort of to fulfill your role and also work with policies.
How do we find that language? Because for me, that's critical. You know,
because you know what, Mary, you just have to hang out with people different than you.
I completely.
I mean, it's like I've spent like many years.
This is the
actually,
problem,
I've been hanging out with money people. Politicians, kind of nice people, a lot of boring people. Sorry, don't show this. It's like you need to understand how they talk and act. And to me, I mean, I hate needing support. So just like we should never say that, you know, I got support from the city or whatever, because I'm not weak. So money is not strong. So it's like, okay, never. We don't say that anymore. Your role and your responsibility is the taxpayers. Norway's decided that actually the taxpayers' money is going to be invested into the arts. So as an investor, you have to tell me, do you want a financial return on investment? Do you want structure? Do you want competence? I mean, the Fondfornyede Bilde, Kulturrådet, it's art itself as a return on investment. It's critical. But the thing is, I need you and your colleagues to actually be more upfront and say, because then we're equal partners. And you're also, as an investor, the moment you invest money from these people to my colleagues, it's actually, there's a risk in this as well. Things need to go haywire. And writing an application to get support for a project and report on that project, it's a loop that there's not learning in that. And so it's like, okay, you have money, I have something, we work together, you invest, we're trying to make your constituents happy, I'll deliver, sometimes I fail, we'll talk, you learn, I learn. But again, you need to hang out with money people.
But Katrina, how much do you want, how much do you think that Bergen Kommune actually does want change, so to speak? Because, I mean, you know, one of the things about the pandemic is that certainly as an organization in the opera, it gave us a fantastic kick up the backside, and it was great. You know, it really pushed us. And without a shadow of doubt, you know, we've learned an enormous amount from it. But, you know, I'm interested to know, as you as a politician, and as a supposer, you probably hate to be called a bureaucrat, but there you are. How much change, I mean, do you want to see?
I would say quite a lot. And I think many people in the sector itself want some of the same. Maybe not everyone, and maybe not at the same degree, but I think when I talk to different organizations and people in all parts of the cultural sector, nobody is really happy with just staying the same. And I think that's also kind of the strength of the sector, that you have to be confident about something. Maybe you feel like sometimes you're weak and you're afraid the politicians are going to take your funding away, and that creates kind of that situation you're talking about needing support. But I think at least the sector has confidence about being creative, being a creative resource, and being able to handle crises and things that happen with the world. And we see this when we talk about climate change, for example, and sustainability, that there's no group of people that are more positive about radical change for sustainability than the cultural sector. They're saying, bring it on. But yeah,
This is what
exactly.
you do. I mean, it's like, so when the crisis hit,
that's why I'm not afraid about challenging the sector, neither in the environmental part, but also in the audience part. That we should be able to say honestly and openly that okay, so right now in the opening of the Bergen International Festival, there was only, I think,
100.
a sixth or maybe 25% of the composers of the pieces that we used were female, and the rest were white males, right? Are we happy with that? I'm not the one to say, like, what is the cutoff for being happy, but I'm not afraid to say, like, okay, that's a fact we can point out, that's interesting. Does that motivate us in some direction? And also, like, who are the people going to arts events and openings and exhibitions? Great people, but do they all look the same in a way?
Yeah.
And I think there's kind of there's an openness to those kinds of facts and a motivation to work with it and be creative and yeah, using your resources to create change.
Stein, you said something really interesting about this move from kind of the rational to the emotional, and of course we've seen it in politics. If you look at politics in America, for instance, you know,
culture war.
Culture war, yes.
Yeah.
Would you like to say a bit more about that? Because I think that's really interesting, and it's also a cross-generational thing in a way, because as we were saying to each other earlier, you know, the kids today, it's all about feelings and communication and all these things, and it's not about, they couldn't care less about structures and all that kind of thing.
And sort of, you know, traditional research. Equinor published something from the Iskant and say it's okay to drill here. If the kids say no, it's a no. I mean, you can argue as much as you want, but the change is going to happen within those communities. I think hopefully, maybe again, it's just me, 14, speaking and just hoping for a change, but I think we're going to see so much more of the push that you get to make other kind of decisions and also trying to sort of rationalize these things, but it comes from belonging, sort of the tribalism, I'm part of this community, identification. The world's been falling apart for 5, 6, 10 years now, at least, and it's kind of these, you can push as much knowledge and facts as you want, but even when we question what is a fact, I mean, these things, just feeling something, and especially this sort of belonging on a very local and close scale, and it's not going to be one, and that's what I'm trying to say as well. It's like, okay, I'm here, you know, I'm too old to be really here, but I have access to people who are really on the pulse of what's going on. So if you're going to see what's, you know, when it comes to politics or democratic structures or technology, I mean, my profession, the music industry, we're on the forefront. We're way ahead of everything else. We know what's going on there. If we can use those kind of sensor to bring back and push and then work together. So it's like, so if Norway, if we're going to make the right decisions, whatever, we need to listen. So feelings and emotions and art is all about, that's, you know, we get up in the morning and we deal with death and life and who are we? It's like, I go to bed and then I work, you know. So when COVID hit, it was like, it's just another week at work. It was like, okay. I went to all these Zoom meetings and all these business people were like scared and la la la. They're like, oh, it's like, this is my life. You know, we do this. I'm not going to make money next month. Oh, that's okay. I didn't do that last year either. So it's like, I'll make money somewhere. So we're so adaptable. We deal with these kind of issues. We have the tools to express and talk about these things. And then I'm being the translator because you and me, there's, you know, we're actually good for each other. We're not fighting. And that's why I'm also sort of expecting you to say something as an investor. Sometimes you do the kunstnerstipend, artistic stipends, because we just want these people to drink and fight and shag and hang and be within the community and challenge the establishment. And sometimes you want to be a little bit instrumental. You give money to this because you don't want the kids to drink and fight in the weekends. You want them to play in a school band. So the money is there, but it's not instrumental, but you invest. Sometimes you just take a risk, and that's my argument to sort of the FRP as well, is like, we need these people. And then I told you, it's like, okay, there's British Art Council. It's the mother and father of the Norwegian Art Council, and it's Keynes, the famous and extremely knowledgeable and important economist after World War II. He's the father. He understood this. He was a part of the Bloomsbury Group. He was hanging out with artists, philosophers, researchers. So the thing is like bringing minds together and discuss and sort of define. But my growing up, the lack of sort of expectation or investment strategies or what am I going to deliver on here? Yeah. Because my field was so ready to deliver, and we love this. Yeah. But so I want you should be even more like, okay, we're using this money here and investing in this because we want artistic return on investment. I want to do this because I need knowledge. So then your job is going to be so much more fun. But never say, we don't need support, never, ever again. I'm not trying to tell Kulturrådet this. It's like, but on the English side of things, they say, supported by the Art Council, and Kristin Daniels was like, couldn't find another way to say this, because this is how they say it internationally. But it's like...
Can I say something about what we need to invest in, I think? It comes back to what you mentioned about the world becoming more or less fact-oriented and more emotional, more identity-driven in decision-making. And I think what we need going forward is to focus on building trust from the bottom of, or not the bottom, from the ground up in a way, in communities. And we've been through a time where we've gone from having churches and religious rooms as being kind of maybe the heart of the community at some point, and then we moved into a more commercial time where we've built all the malls around the city, and that's where you hang out. But that created a hole, I think, for people to meet and talk and exchange ideas and debate, and maybe that made us vulnerable to the trends that we've seen, more populism and alternative facts, because you don't have that arena to meet and to discuss and to challenge each other and to build that trust. And I think that cultural arenas and cultural groups and artists are excellent for building those resources in communities, because when you pick up some kind of topic with the lens of an artist, you can go places where you never could have gone if you just have hosted a town hall meeting. If I hosted a town hall meeting from being just a politician about, okay, how is Åsane going to contribute to stopping climate change? I don't think that would have kind of brought us as far as if some kind of artist group had gone into that. I think there is a potential there.
Completely.
I think also, this is a bit of a swerve maybe, but, we're also talking about culture buildings, and I actually feel very strongly about culture buildings.
Like building?
Building buildings, yes, buildings. And as you know, there's a lot of discussion about building a new, what is being called an opera house in Bergen. And given that I leave my post in Bergen in 10 days, I'm not afraid to say that I think that's a terrible idea. And what we need is a major culture house that does exactly what you're saying, that brings people together, where there are spaces for the elderly to meet and spaces for kids to do things with the elderly and places for debate, and where, yes, of course, there's a wonderful performance space. We do not need another building. I mean, I love Grieghallen in many ways. Grieghallen does not bring people together. You buy a ticket and you go to Grieghallen, and maybe you have a drink with friends at the bar, but it's not a gathering place. And in my view, what the city needs desperately are gathering places where we can have that kind of debate. Now that I've stopped wagging my finger at you, I'll come back to the point. I think primarily what we're talking about is creating means for culture to be useful. And it's something that I've talked about a lot in the past, and it's something that I've felt very strongly that Bergen National Opera should do, that yes, of course, it's critically important to put wonderful productions on the stage in Grieghallen, but for me, the work we did in Stavanger as the capital of culture, and also here in Bergen with the opera, some of the things that have meant the most to me of when we've really gone out and built that trust that you're talking about in a community. And I think that, for me, that's where I would love to see funding go, actually, to building those relationships, but building that trust in communities. And of course, that means paying a great deal of attention to generations which are way, way, way younger than me. But I think that being a useful thing, I cannot think that we can go on training artists to think that they're going to play the Brahms violin concerto with an orchestra. You know, we need stage managers, we need people who can make culture happen, we need people like you and you. But that teaching aspect of things, could you talk a bit about what you're teaching, Stein, in that respect?
Basically, when I teach at the University in Stavanger, the entrepreneurship for musicians, it's the most boring title ever.
How to pay your income tax. Yes.
First thing I say, the world doesn't, it doesn't need you. I mean, for the last 20 years, Norway has been educated 282% more higher educated artists in Norway, a country of 5.5 million people. Can talk about market, and I say Kulturaktivistisk is the biggest market force in Norway. What does this mean? So that's something we can discuss somewhere else. But it's not, okay, we don't need another, please don't be another guitar player, because there's too many already, and they're really good. So we need artists. So going to Bjerksted Conservatorium, it's basically, you're building your toolbox. So if someone stamps on an electric guitar with feedback and it resonates with me, that's more important than you spending 7 years doing these chords. It's just boring. We don't need sports. So basically, understanding that you're learning, you're building a toolbox so you can actually express. So you need to be an interesting person. You need to go and, I send them to the museum, visual arts, dance. You need to have something to say. So basically, and if that's the thing, then we can start. So you need to make the best art ever or most interesting. I don't know what that is, and that's up to them. But I'll teach them everything else. How do you do that? How do you bring this and actually makes pay your rent? So, and I asked them, so, do you know what kind of life do you want to live? How much does that actually cost? And then they break it down. It's like 2 cars, house, and then they make a plan for 10 years. And then we sort of go back and trying to say, you're going to live of your art, so you work on that. That's for someone else, and for you to, that's all. But I'll take you through the rest, and we'll see how we can get there.
Yeah.
Because then it starts. But I don't care if you're a good guitar player. Who cares? There's too many. I want it interesting. And that's, again, saying art is actually the foundation of everything. But we need voices, and we need stories, and we need insight, and we need the ones who actually give you shit every single freaking day, because it's important for you to have that resistance. And again, it's been like that forever. Money is an important thing. So artists saying, it's I can't talk about art and money in the same sentence. Okay, the moment there is actually 50 50 øre involved in this, you're part of an economic system. And you can get fucked by not taking part of that and trying not to, but it's like, that's so old school. That generation is leaving us, hopefully soon. And there is, like you say, these days, kids, I mean, money is part of whatever they do. And it's interesting. Sometimes it's part of your artistic project, sometimes it just means to do something else. And again, like you're saying, you should come to Stavanger. They're trying to spend 2-3 million on some buildings. But the thing is, like, you should invest in bars and the communities. You should, like, that's where people meet. That's where these conversations happen. Like, we can do festivals and stuff, but people meeting, drinking, discussing, club nights. I mean, that's the sort of the unofficial dialogue. That's so important to a really vibrant city. And I think Bergen has been way better than Stavanger when it comes to this.
But can I ask a question? Because I follow you on that, and that kind of that's where we lag behind in a way in cultural funding. But at the same time, because I come from a research background, or I started a small research career before I got hijacked into politics. And in that area, there's also this distinction between the kind of basic research, or the research that only is there for knowledge building itself, and the research you do on applied problems, that you want to reduce some kind of target by this much. How can you do that? You have some research projects. And those things both are funded, and I think I think it's an important thing to distinguish between those two. But at the same time, I think they are also in one way the same, because when you invest in trying to solve one problem, you invest on kind of a short-term basis. You know what the problem is, you have defined it, and you need a solution that you can see results quite quickly. But with kind of basic research, that's kind of building a preparedness for the knowledge that we don't even know that we are going to need for problems that we don't even know we're going to have, because we know that that has helped us in the past, right? We learn from the past that we never know what kind of knowledge is going to be important and it's going to be useful. But it always kind of comes back to that, being important and useful. And I think that also can be mirrored in the arts and culture sector, that one reason that we say art has value in itself is because we don't know what kind of art is going to be important and useful and nice in the future, and important for our identities and so on. So when I say useful, it's not only in outcomes like you say, like stopping youth crime, and useful in entertaining people, and useful for economical reasons, but also for the emotional parts of us.
But I've introduced, I call it the Elvis model, because when you teach and you make a model, it needs a name. So it's like Elvis, like, whoa. And it's like art speaks to 4 parts of the body for a human being. The brain, like you say, sort of the R&D, sort of inventing ideas, and actually sort of sometimes called the pling-plong music part. You know, completely what is this? The heart, emotions, and then the kook, which is sort of the primal drive, like as humans, and then the dancing shoes. So that's a whole human being. You know, the cultural policies back in the 70s was just chopping off the head. It's like, okay, Kulturaktivistisk, and it's all about the pling-plong. But it's like, that's the whole human being.
But how do
so
you
I
make
ask,
a
so I
funding
ask,
system
because then I ask
for
like the
that?
students, because it's like the different funding system for different things. Maybe the dancing shoes is actually driven by traditional commercial selling tickets, danseband, you know, it's just for fun, just makes life good. So I ask my students and my artists, it's like, you know, how many % of your music and your artistic ideas actually, are you like, you know, interested in sort of the research part of art, or are you the entertainment part of art, and then everything in between? Because different money go to different parts. So you have like a toolbox of different tools and to invest with, and within. And then, so it's like, it doesn't make sense trying to mix like they did back in the days when Spellemannprisen couldn't touch the danseband. And danseband was the most horrible music ever. It's probably the best musicians and the best rigs ever. They understood what they did. They understood the audience. They didn't pretend to be something else. They were great. So the thing is like, they served their purpose. And they had like, there was an industry around and the money, so everything.
And
but it's
discipline,
like, and a discipline. So it's like,
yeah.
I have great respect for that because they're not pretending to be something else. And that's going back to what you're saying. We should invest a lot of money into art stipends and actually just invest in the people, the artists, not the art itself. I don't care about but it's the people who think differently.
Yeah.
We should spend a lot of money on that, and we can afford to do that because you just want them to be here and at the bar, arguing with someone, discussing, keeping the debate, and actually, that's when you start. So to me, it's like, instead of trying, in Norway, we're just like, that's a whole human being. You're a whole human being, aren't you? So sometimes,
yes.
I'm sure you've been jumping up and down to some crazy, stupid music that you wouldn't
most certainly,
know. But
yeah.
it's like, because, you need this, and you're interested, my interest is maybe somewhere here and there, because it's fascinating. I like the R&D in arts and the challenge, but it serves different purposes. And some artists just needs to do this because it's good for us. It's good for. But at the moment we start to think about this, we don't talk about the same thing, everything at the same time. And you have great tools and you have money, which is quite important. So you should invest in the R&D, but you should also invest in the super commercial parts, festivals, whatever, because we're whole human beings.
But I come back to the kind of the language that we use, because I mean, one of the horrendous problems about evaluating the arts is, I can think of many, many occasions when I've been to an event and it's involved maybe community or it's involved kids, and perhaps kids working with a fantastic, inspirational person. And I can swear that child that was on the platform was 3 centimeters taller when they left. But how do you write that down when you get the form from the ministry or the whatever? It's a tricky one, because we're coming back to this language thing.
But then again, everyone is a human being, and most people actually have feelings. That's our core product. We understand feelings and stuff. And I say, this is an argument, the global music industry is roughly like $51 billion. It's nothing. It's just 1/8 of Apple or whatever. It's like, that's the core economy, but the consequence economy that I represent is, and I say, 1,000 trillions of dollars. It's like we can change
economy. I have to write
the consequence economy, and it's like, because we can change. We can get elected a new president in the U.S. if that drive comes from these milieus and these artists and all that stuff. We can change politics, and politics is big numbers. So if we always talk about like the music economy, it's nothing. It's big, but it's nothing. So, but the consequence economy, the impact economy from what we do, it's everything. And suddenly, then you want to talk to me, because I can change your life dramatically. And we should own that, and I'm owning that. I'm trying to say, we need to talk this way and actually claim this. And sometimes it's not about the individual artists, because they're artists. It's me. It's the infrastructure, it's the management, it's the people around, even the politicians who care about this. But we should position ourselves on, it's $1,000 trillion. My God. And then, people in finance, they understand this. And it's quite interesting. The last year, there's been actually $1,000 trillion been invested in rights, Bob Dylan's rights. So the immaterial value, the understanding of sort of the financial value of immaterial value, the value of a song, it's like, it's been invested so heavily over the past 18 months. It's crazy to see all the big VC funds moving into that space. Yep. And that's because there's a financial sort of return on investment, but also they understand the impact of what music actually means to people. And if you want to make change, you need to understand that. And my business and my industry, we know this. We're so good at it, and we're so close to this.
Yeah.
And we're going to be an important part of what's going to come for the next 10, 50 years. But I need to train people. We need to sort of see this and learn how to speak this. And
We do.
I've been doing this for 10 years, and finally it's sort of coming together. And it just makes
hard.
sense because everyone's got emotions. They can understand what impact the song can actually make, which is like the beauty of this little thing.
It's hard because we sort of, it's also, you know, us northern people, we're not brought up to talk about feelings, and there's such an extraordinary shift.
That's why you
now.
play the hardingfela.
Yes,
because
you don't have to talk. Yes,
it's an instrument
true.
straight to your soul.
But it's really, it's, you know, it's such a, particularly in the States, you know, when I worked in the States, I found, you know, people's ability to, quite extraordinary, having been brought up as a Scottish child and feeling that hand on my shoulder, the sort of Janteloven, you know, who do you think you are thing from...
Fuck Janteloven.
Yes.
That's
So
gone a long time
there's
ago.
hard things. I'd quite like to just to sort of bring this back into the Siste kapittel thing, about how we harness the energy and the huge talent and experience of our older community, but also how we look after that audience in a way, because what we're talking about, and I started by saying, you know, how is art going to change the world and all these kind of things. The fact is, you know, there is a very large generation with money who are giving money to and looking after what we would call museum art. You know, and that's, you know, it's a standard kind of thing about any organization. Anybody leading an organization knows they must look after the audience they have, as well as building an audience for the future. And where do we find the balance in that? Do you want to start on that one, Katrina?
Finding the balance between the future and the...
Yeah, because we have to look
now.
after that audience, you know, who have paid very...
But is it only an audience? Maybe.
No, it's a way of thinking, but it's
the knowledge that
It's-
sits
yeah,
between these ears. You know, the older. I mean, it's not just like passive audience. I mean, you're
No,
part
not
of
at all.
something. That competence and knowledge, it's actually incredible.
But there are
valuable.
a lot of people who want to be passive audience. You know, if you look at some of the major institutions, not just in Norway, and you look at the you know, the demographic and the age thing, there are people who, for 25 years, have been buying season tickets for the theatre or the orchestra or whatever, and they have every right to do that. And in a way, how do we?
I think...
It's tricky because we're so, you know, I hope I've been an agent of change in Bergen in a way. It's certainly what I wanted to be, and I'm certainly not 35.
If enough people dislike you, then you have.
Yes, that's probably
the thing.
true.
It's like if
But you
people
see,
love,
I was very, very fortunate. As a small child, when I started to play the violin, I had a violin teacher who would say to me, "You can't play that until you've read that book." Or you can't play that until we go and look at the Scottish Colours exhibition somewhere. So right from my very first attempts to get involved in culture, it was always thrown wide open. Go away and listen to Leonard Cohen, and then you might be able to play that piece of Brahms. You know, it was an amazing start in life. So I'm not average in that respect, but I have to and do respect the older audience who want to buy their ticket and sit quietly in a concert hall.
But I also think there's maybe, and I've fallen into that trap myself, but sometimes we also stereotype the older audiences, and we think about them as the established audiences. But there are also a lot of people in all age groups that have never been to an opera and that have never set their foot in Grieghallen, and that enjoy danseband and watch TV. And I think that age isn't necessarily what defines the difference between the now audience and the future audience. I think it's more about looking at all the other parts, all the other divides in society, the economical divides, the divides because of education, and which kind of socioeconomic group you identify with, political affiliations, and of course ethnic background, cultural background, language, immigrant background, refugee background, everything else that makes us different. I think that's kind of the way you have to look at it. And I think also kind of the tool that you have to use in order to move forward and to gain acceptance for change, both in the established audiences and in the future audiences. I think transparency and communication and openness about funding and power and who decides what and how can you affect that, I think that's kind of the key. Because as a person who never looked into the municipality budget before I became a politician and responsible for handing out all this money, I was quite shocked that, like, wow, that's a lot of millions that we're spending on arts museums. That investing, and maybe we can challenge them to I don't know, be a resource in more people's lives. There's some potential there.
Because Mary, okay, so basically I'm on the board of Stavanger Symphony Orchestra. We have to be relevant. If we're not. So the question is, why do you want the audience to be there in the first place? Can we explain what we do to them?
What is it?
If we just want them there because we need financing or to show off some statistics, it doesn't matter. We're going to be irrelevant sooner than later, probably sooner. So the question to the institution is basically, why do we want an audience? And do we want a different demographic? Again, the Elvis model, some people like the easy things. They like the hits. Sometimes we need to mix and curate, and we need to communicate. And somebody told me, don't say digital marketing anymore because it's all about audience development. So it's like, so you don't need digital. So it's like, and it's like, as an institution, why do we want an audience? So maybe that's a good starting point.
It's been a huge question just in the last 18 months as well. Yeah, and when we couldn't have what we thought was audience can't be there. So what are we making art for?
Why are we there? And if you ask a violinist in Stavanger Symphony Orchestra, maybe the answer would be completely different than it's. But usually it's like, I think it's for us to actually be relevant without compromising quality and the core product. And I say maybe contemplation is a very good selling point. There's all these things that actually resonates with people. And I use my little Elvis model. Sometimes you need to do this, and sometimes you need to do this.
But it's how we bring people together. I come back to, actually, I'm sorry, but I come back to the importance of buildings and gathering spaces. Yeah. Because we all, we've all got a lot to say. Everybody in this room has things to say. And we'd like to hear them in a minute too. But isn't the building a toolbox for you to express what you want to do with the opera? So it's like, okay, sometimes it's like, it's beautiful and expensive, but it's just a toolbox. But it's a good acoustics. It's but important. Why do we keep building? I mean, this is a beautiful space, but why do we keep building these?
Because it's human. It's a thing. Things got financial value. Stavanger, we love to build things and invest in buildings because it symbolizes wealth and money.
And vanity.
And for you, it's harder to argue that investing in these communities, because again, you need to say, you never support, you need to talk about investment. What kind of return on investment are you getting back to the Bergen Kommune when you invest this money?
It's a more challenging job as a politician to communicate that you've done a good job if everything that you've invested in
but sometimes you have to fail, and that's okay.
Also,
that's part of the investment.
I think we also, as politicians, should have some confidence in our ability to communicate the value of investing in communities, and not just take the easy way out and give money to things that are tangible and big and expensive and look good and that are easy to get a picture of in the paper.
Which have history.
I think we have to also step up our game and say, okay, there are things that are more important, and we should be able to stand for that.
And I think you think it's a fair game. This kind of conversation would be quite interesting for you. I mean, if we can talk about these things, and sometimes you don't want to invest in me, and I get really pissed off, but it's okay, because you can argue. Sometimes you but it's also, I need to deliver on the investment, and you have plans and structures and ambitions for the city. I can be part of that, and also, and art is it's part of that, but it's not a supported industry. It's
But
actually.
I think also in Bergen that we have a quite unique potential for having that conversation, because I think a lot of, or my fear is that a lot of people who work mostly with what you said, the pling plong.
The pling plongs, and it's okay.
I don't know if that's okay to say.
It's actually a compliment.
Kind of the more basic, like ground arts, in a way, the basic, the pure arts, if you can say that they need to trust that decision makers aren't going to take that funding away.
Because it's R&D, and you love R&D as a researcher, so it's no problem for you to argue.
And in Bergen, I think we have that trust because we have the identity of being a cultural city, and all the parties in the bystyre, and it doesn't really matter who comes and goes, because everybody pretty much agrees that, we should have some of these, like the basic arts funding. We need artists living in the city to be a creative reserve.
I have no idea where we are with time.
No.
We have to finish.
Just
could we have one question? Is there one question from anybody? Yes.
Laila, I think you're the only one.
Bare snakk høyt.
Yeah.
Ja.
Hi, Laila. My name is Laila. I work with music, contemporary music. Thank you so much. This is so interesting. We should have 3 hours. About 20% of the budget in the orchestra that I represent is spent on music and creative projects with children and young people and young amateurs. We boldly try to fill the hole, the creative hole in the public school today. We try, classroom by classroom. In the public sector that I represent, we're quite good when it comes to working with children and reaching out to youth in our both artistic programs and projects. I think we have still some potential, but we're on a good and steady path. And since we're now at a festival called Siste, kapittel, I would say that in the last part of our lives, music and arts are as important as it is in the rest of our lives. And I think we have much, much longer way to go in our concrete programs. So what does the panel think about the potential for us, for all of us, for the politicians and the bureaucrats and the public and the private sector, as to how to reach the full potential of a more extensive outreach to people in their last chapter? Thank you.
Thank you.
Should I go ahead?
Yeah.
I think there's a great potential to doing more. I hope that we're going to look back in not too many years, maybe in 5, 10, 15 years, and say, what were we doing before? Why weren't there more music therapists, artists working with people who live at home still, who don't live at home and live in the municipality institutions, in the hospitals? I hope that we're going to look back and say, why weren't we investing in this? But it's a big ship to turn, because like you say, like a lot of the funding right now, it's tied up in what we already do. So we need to be brave as politicians and decision makers, and we need to be transparent, but we also need support from people. We want people to speak up and to highlight these needs, because it's difficult to lead if there's no one behind you, so to speak.
I also think the industry itself, I mean, there is music technology and health tech, health tech, I don't know if that's a word. I think our industry is actually not doing that well, because these things will soon measure your blood pressure and your adrenaline, all these things. So you could, the effect of music is being researched on. There's a lot of like good research, but it sort of happens here. We need more use technology, not like technology for the sake of technology, but actually to deal with dementia. There's some really interesting stuff happening in Bergen and companies here. I'm kind of so it's like these things when it comes to late life stages, but also, we've seen this through the whole year. It's like, it's not about like bringing the Bergen Philharmonic Orchestra on a stage to your little screen. We need to be relevant in different ways, using technology to actually reach people. And now we're going to be thrown off. And
The police are going to come and take us off
and
the
hopefully,
stage.
but
Thank you.
people should dance more.
That's true.
And we should
We
hang
said
out
that in
more.
Stavanger, do you remember? It was one of our
sure,
aims. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you to be continued in a pub somewhere or in a new culture house in Bergen, perhaps, in the future. Thank you very much. And please back this festival, because it's just so important. And congratulations to you, Anna, for starting it. I think it's just great. I would say that, but I think it's just great. Thank you for being here.
Is this on? Is this on? Hello? Yes. I just want to say thank you so much, Mary. This is the last thing you do in Bergen for B&O.
True.
So I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank you for being the jordmor, as we say, the midwife of the Siste kapittel. When I came to you with a crazy idea of doing this 4 years ago, I think it's almost now, and you said, yes, what can I do for you? How can I help you? And I think that attitude is what's like something you have been talking about here today, that you actually, as one of the big authorities on culture in Bergen, you said to me, yes, I'm down, how can I help you? So that's an attitude I try to take with me in everything I do, and I just wanted to thank you so much for supporting this from the very beginning.
Oh,
it's been super important.
Such a pleasure. And I've got good people as there. We have good people here. You know, we'll be fine.
Yes, and
we'll all be fine.
Thanks to the two of you as well. I'm governed by my emotions because this is a bit emotional about you, Mary, since I know you now. But it's like Katrina, you're doing an amazing job for Bergen, and Stein, thank you so much for coming, and I look forward to getting to know you more.